In this episode, I interviewed Dr. Jason Londo about our recent freeze. Kerik gives us the disease forecast, and Anna concludes the episode with the state of the state update on phenology and degree day accumulations. Okay, so today I'm speaking with Dr. Jason Londo, a previous guest of ours, an associate professor of horticulture, and an expert on the effects of climate on perennial plants, also known as a stress physiologist. Hey, Jason.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we had this recent freeze, and there's been a lot of concern in the industry about it. So, what do you think happened, other than it just being a couple of nights of cold? And what do you think is different about this from other cold damage?
Yeah, so this was a pretty normal seasonal amount of cold. I think it's the reason that we're concerned is that we had such a warm period before it and that advanced early spring phenology. And so when you think about cold damage, the more developed the apples are, the worse off you are from a cold point of view, the more sensitive to cold freeze damage you are. And so this last couple nights of very cold weather caused damage to some of the sensitive parts of the developing apple buds. And depending on the stage of different cultivars, you get different kinds of damage.
Is there any sense of what regions may have been hit the hardest, or any sort of general sense of like what percent loss happened?
From what I have seen, mostly through the extension networks, is that there is damage being noticed. I haven't heard of anything really catastrophic. I've heard patchy cold damage, more severe in low pockets in orchards, more damage farther away from the lakes where you have a better buffer from microclimate. Damage percentages is going to differ based on the cultivar because whatever stage the cultivar was in will be tied to how sensitive those tissues are. So things that were more developed have a higher percentage damage. But again, I haven't heard of anything catastrophic. Certainly noticeable, but well within the amount of flowers that you would drop with a thinning program.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Is there's been a lot of buzz on, oh, maybe this just did our normal thinning. And so there's been a lot of discussion about thinning procedures. But I think what I'm interested in is, what do you think exactly happens to, let's say you have a flower on the tree. So what's exactly happening when they're exposed to this level of cold?
Well, from the most simplistic point of view is that when you have freezing occur inside the green tissues, that the ice either mechanically destroys the cell or dehydrates them to a level where they can't recover. And so depending on, again, your developmental stage, different tissues are sensitive to different temperatures. Typically, we think of the ovary and the pistil as being the most sensitive tissue. And so if you're getting close to flower, those ovaries are going to die at the warmest temperature, where you would still have a flower that opens and maybe not see any brown tissue, but that center of that flower is going to be dead. Now, if the bud is less developed, closer to green tip, you can still see some damage in those reproductive organs. The observation that we've been getting on the Great Lakes Fruit Workers email thread is that it seems like there may be some damage to the king bloom stem, in that growers, Dr. Rosenberger, Dr. Robinson are both reporting having seen king bloom stems that are quite a bit shorter than the laterals. And that is correlated with cold exposure, presumably damaging that stem tissue as it's developing and so shortening it.
So what's the overall effect on the fruit if this happens?
So I've not seen this personally, but in reading what these other experts have seen, typically the plant can still set a king fruit, but it will have a much shorter stem. Sometimes the tree will abort that fruit because there's probably underlying damage we can't see. The biggest problem is if the tree tries to hold on to it and you try to thin, that you may drop the kings and the laterals. So it tends to be a little touchier about how to thin.
Yeah, I think that's going to make it even more difficult to assess what the thinning program is going to end up being. But I guess I have like one last question. So this winter was mild, and
Mhm.
that's been noted all across the state. What do you ultimately think about these more mild winters? Do you think that precludes a spring freeze, or is there any sort of pattern there with a more mild winter and this type of damage?
I would say what we see, and this is from my winter freeze research, where we look at cold hardiness in the stem tissue and bud tissue in midwinter, which is very different kind of cold response. The amount of cold hardiness that the trees will put on in a cold year is greater than in a warm year. And the trees need to lose all of that cold hardiness in order to break bud. And so when you have a mild year, you put on less defense, you need less heat to wake up. And so a mild winter doesn't make the bud tissue or anything more sensitive to spring frost, except for advances phenology, which makes them more susceptible to frost. So it's not a direct line, but you can clearly see where this would go. The more mild our winters are, the earlier our springs will be. And because we are in the northern latitudes, that does not decrease frost exposure.
So basically, as we shift climate here and go through whatever that even means, this could be a more persistent issue. Are there any products being developed to help with cold hardiness?
From the frost resistance point of view, there is a couple different approaches that people can take for frost protection. Some of them, we're well aware of here in New York. Windmills, wind machines are a way of modifying the temperatures of a single event to try to prevent frost damage. If you go to warmer climates or places where they have the infrastructure already in place, overhead sprinklers is another way to get around frost events. And that works simply by coating the tissue in a thin layer of ice and protecting it from reaching the very low temperatures that cause damage. People will use smudge pots or burn things. That's a really inefficient way of doing it. And there is chemistry on the way. We do know that there are some plant hormones that can slow down phenology. Working out when to spray is going to be tricky. And because you can't be certain on when a frost is going to come along, spraying with chemistry is going to have to be something like you do it every year. And some years it pays off, and some years it's a waste of your money. And so finding a price point where growers are comfortable with that investment, regardless whether or not we have a frost, is probably the biggest challenge.
Wow, this is all great information. I'm excited that there is some sort of chemistry coming down the line because that could assist with this. Thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Happy to.
Okay, let's do a early week update for scaffolds on some disease forecasting. It is Monday, May 6th, and we're coming off of an exciting weekend of rain. I'm going through the various lists. We'll start with apple scab, and then we'll go to fire blight for each of the locations. Let's start with Riverhead. What does it look like this week? I'm going to go ahead and move my Riverhead data. We're so close to the end of the season for Riverhead. I don't want to cut off predictions entirely, so I'm going to move that green tip date from the 7th. I'm going to go ahead and go, let's go 10 days, maybe. Let's go 10 days to see what we're at. It still looks like we're getting pretty close to the end of the season for Riverhead in terms of ascospore ejection. Remember, you can still get infections from conidia that are produced on lesions that were caused by ascospores early on. Right now, it looks like you're in a long, drawn-out, drizzly affair with a lot of rain coming in on the 6th and ejection all week long of 5, 6, 6, 1, 1, 9, 8, 1, all the way through the 10th. We're going to get a lot of little bits of rain all week long, leading up to a good bit of leaf wetness hours, a little bit every day, and something that looks like a really long, drawn-out infection period. Hopefully, you've put on an application yesterday and maybe even today if you've gotten enough sunny weather like we did here in Geneva. If not, it's such a long period, you might want to come in afterwards and protect against probably the one that's going to show up on May 12th and 13th, and you get this one May 11th off. The forecast doesn't extend that far for this, and I wouldn't really trust it past that many days anyway. Looks like it's just going to be a long leaf wetting period, but if you have two back-to-back coming up again, put something on with a protectant and some kickback activity. Otherwise, you're pretty close to the end of the season, but you need to watch these last long wetting events right at the end of the season because a little bit of conidia here and there produced from the ascospores that cause the first lesions could cause infections. What does fire blight look like? We're going to go ahead and let you keep your bloom date 4/11. A pretty easy week. It's cool at night. A couple warm days, and this probably results from the greater than average temperatures of 62. This gives you about 18 on the EIP, which is out of 100 or more, which is pretty low, and your TRV is about 35, which is marginal. However, it is kicking it into high gear because you've got flowers in bloom, and there's rain, and there is average temperatures of greater than 60 on May 6th and 7th. Let's move back to apple scab and look into the Hudson Valley, see how they're doing. Has it gotten any better? Is it just one long infection period after another? It just looks like like it's never going to end. Hopefully, as I talked about in the other video, you went ahead and got something on or getting something on tomorrow. Looks like you get a break in the rain on Tuesday, or maybe you had a little bit today. Not much has changed. I'm going to move your green tip date about 10 days ahead. I want to keep this going. Massive ejection this week. May 5th, 26th, May 6th, 1%, May 8th, 23% of the spores. You're going into a really strong end of the apple scab primary season ejection event, and might as well finish strong. There should be a slight break and all this drizzly leaf wetness, and in that point, I would go in with a good protectant combo with a single site fungicide, one of the best you got, and get anything that creeped forward since your last spray got washed off, and then protect all the way through to the weekend, where hopefully you will also get a break on the 11th. What's fire blight look like here in Hudson Valley? Let's take a look. All right, on ahead. Oh goodness, it looks really, really bad. Hopefully, if you are getting a break in the rain, now's time to put things on. The daily TRV values will move up into 312, which is pretty high. Not an extreme from the Cougar Blight TRV, but high nonetheless. However, if you look at the Mary Blight EIP type prediction, you're going to see they're hitting 100, 111, 115, 123 with an infection warning. And this is because the high average temperatures are all above 60, and you've got an EIP of over 100, accumulated enough heat hours, and there's bloom, and there's water. Something is going to happen. If it hasn't stopped raining, this is the time to use one of the antibiotics, I'd say, and hit this hard period pretty strongly. Moving up the state, Capital District, let's look at the old Voorheesville area here. What's it saying about it? This one, it's putting a more normal green tip of 4.8. Probably in a week from now, I'll move the green tip date up some because I want to keep seeing these predictions for a little while longer. Another really awful period, May 15th, you're hitting the end, 74% maturity, 17% ejection on the 5th, and then coming into the 8th with a 25% ejection. You have one day tomorrow between the gap and all of this leaf wetness to get it done, cover everything. I'm saying protected single site fungicide that'll do a little bit of reach back on the 6th and protect you forward on through the weekend, because this is the big one. Let's finish that season strong. Looking at fire blight in the Capital District. Let's see what we got. Nice and cool. All right. Yes, we're seeing EIP risk levels of orange, but they're still 42. And it's a little hot. And I bet if you're a little south in the Capital District towards the Hudson Valley, you might start to see those infection numbers, particularly as you go into the 8th and the temperatures get hotter with leaf wetness. It hasn't been warm enough to accumulate enough heat wetness. In this case, it's like you want to try out one of the biologicals. This is the time I would do it. Your TRVs are just still low, about 313. They're really only going to get really tough around the 300s or 400s for those really high levels on the Cougar Blight TRVs. So I'd say it's not necessarily a terrifying situation. Moving into Peru, how is it looking as well? Do you get a break from the location? And yeah, you looks like you had a break. Looks like over the last week and the start of the week, you had a little 9% ejection, but things weren't enough. I'm guessing the average temperature was just so low that it suggests it does not cause an infection event. Now, that being the case, it could have been just a little bit higher with a little more leaf wetness and caused a problem. So if you have a little bit of variability from the northern orchard site, you might want to have been cautious with that one. But as it's coming into a massive event on the 8th, lots of leaf wetness, lots of ejection. We're well into the 35% ejection starting on May 8th for a combined all week long infection event until the weekend. So I would still go protectant single site fungicide to really get and protect that crop for the coming weekend. And if something did happen to you on the 5th or 6th, probably would take care of it as well. Let's look at Peru fire blight. I suspect it's probably good. Today, TRV is around 53. Nice little nightly dip around the May 6th, probably a nighttime cool temperature, kicked your moderate back to a low, even with an EIP of 31. That means you probably had a really low nighttime risk, low average temperatures. Yeah, we're looking at around the 60s on that day. It's just an easy fire blight season. Hopefully you're in bloom on the 2nd. So it looks like it started and you're off to a good start. Let's move into the Finger Lakes for Interlaken, covering the Ithaca and Geneva area just below Sodus. How do we look? Gonna go ahead and move that green tip date 10 days ahead. I doubt it really happened then. Looks like you're coming in off a big ejection and you're moving forward on the 8th with a 7 and another 7. That's about 15%. That really kicks into my threshold of like, hey, use a single site fungicide. And it looks like we have a long drizzly infection period. I'd go that mancozeb with some single site, make sure that's well stuck on there. You could go captazeb, but if you have one of the fancy products, you're close enough to in the middle of bloom and petal fall to even pick up some of that other disease control. I think I would just go mancozeb, one of the other single site fungicides that you like best, and take this out. It's a long, not a massive ejection, but a long ejection over many, many days. An area fire blight, interlaken area. We have still a lot of nighttime, cool night times. It's kicking the things back down. We are having some average daily temperatures of the F62. Wow, I really feel like it was going to be hotter tomorrow, but I'm guessing we're having a low in the night. I don't see a low temp on that. That's probably why our May 7th drops back down. We're not accumulating a lot of heat hours to be worried, but if you were a pathologist going out with gobs of fire blight, maybe I'll get lucky, but I think you'll get lucky and escape any natural inoculum buildup. It's your chance to try out a biological if your cougar blight's also been, your Mary Blight saying about 60 with a yellow moderate, and your TRV is just, 150 and a little bit in the sort of high range. I think it's a pretty safe area with that. Now let's take a look at SOTUS area. We'll go up a little bit further on towards the lake. So they're looking for apple scab. I'm going to bring the SOTUS date forward from the 13th to the 23rd just to really see what it looks like. Massive ejection over the weekend. You're getting your break today and probably maybe a little bit tomorrow. It seems like looks like some rain's coming in on the 7th at some point. Not a lot, just a little drizzle, but a longer drizzly combined infection period. You got one break, put something on. Still thinking mancozeb plus the single site. Use one of your materials now and go into that. Get you through to the weekend where hopefully we'll not have another ejection. It's just a lot of cumulative little discharges throughout these sort of combined periods, and some of them really discrete massive discharges as well. What's it look like for fire blight and Williamson? Okay, let's take a look along the lake. Gorgeous. It's just real easy. You got no heat accumulation. Your EIP is 0 for most days, and your TRV is looking at 43 or 26, all green in the low marginal and nice moderate yellow. It's a real win for fire blight management. Scab's going to be a little more challenging. We're going to have a little more challenging trying to figure out how to keep all of our single site chemistries throughout the rest of the season if these rain trends continue, and I hope they don't. Your average temperatures are all under 60. You should be feeling great. Trees will not die. You might lose fruit to apple scab, but your plantings should be safe. Let's hope we don't get a lot of heat around Memorial Day. Let's go check out the Niagara area. I'm going to go to Appleton. Right. Holy smokes, Appleton did not get a break and it says everything's over. Wow. Okay, let's change that green tip date to the 22nd. That's a perfect example of taking that green tip date of 3/12 and moving it ahead because it turned everything off. But we could see from the forecast that it's just one massive long infection event. According to this friend Mark Russell, it did not get a break and it's just raining all the time. If your chart looked like this, where you see almost 7 days in a row of and combined infections and in multiple infection events, definitely when you get a break, if you can get a break enough to get that tractor in, mancozeb, best single site fungicide that you got. Maybe one of the sticky ones. I would maybe go for maybe an Inspire, an Endar, or maybe a fluopyram or another Fontellus or something like that. Put that in there with your Manzate and really get those trees coated. Never thought I would say that, but it happened. Okay, 14% already ejected. 5, 6, and 7. It's just a trickle long wetting event, but let's keep that rain off there and get those trees till the season's over. It seems like you're probably getting very close to the end. We don't want to lose it all in the last quarter of the apple scab season. You can definitely see this is one of those cases why I leave those models, move that green tip date so they keep moving. And if it goes away next heat week, I'm going to move the green tip date even further because I want to keep seeing those predictions, because if the ascospores aren't getting you, 1 or 2 canidia overwintering in buds or produced on a lesion that already slipped through, and the massive amount of rain can't end it all. Fire blight, let's hope things look better in the Niagara region for fire blight, and I bet they do. Yeah, nice. We're looking at a couple warm days coming in off the weekend, but it's like moderate weather. EIP's around 10, 11. Your TRV's 31. Nothing, all green. Should be a great time. Maybe put double nickel in with your apple scab spray if you can get it in, or some one of the other biologicals that also has activity against apple scab like Serenade Opti, and put all those in there. Maybe you'll get enough power to punch out the scab and protect your stuff against fire blight as well. All right, well, that's going to be scaffolds in my midweek video. See you next week.
And now for the state of the state, your weekly roundup of phenology and degree day accumulations from the major fruit production regions of the state. I'm Anna Wallis with the New York State IPM program at Cornell. And as usual, the information I'm sharing has been aggregated from regional specialists around the state, including Mike Bastow, Janet Van Zorn, Mario Miranda-Sazo, Craig Kalki, and Dan Donahue. It also includes my own observations and information collected from NEWA. Starting with a quick recap from the month of April, according to the Northeast Regional Climate Center, in general, most of New York was just a bit warmer and wetter than average for that month. We were about 1 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than average in April, but 3 to 7 degrees above average for the past 3 months since February. Precipitation in April across the state was close or a little bit above average, with 3 to 5 inches recorded at most NEWA weather stations. Regarding the cold weather event a couple of weeks ago, temperatures in the 20s were recorded the mornings of Thursday and Friday for 25 and 26, and damage is being assessed across the state, and we're seeing damage in buds in many regions, but there are also many healthy buds being identified in most places. Now is still a really good time to be evaluating damage. If possible, be looking in different parts of the canopy and different parts of the block so that you can guide your thinning decisions. As we've been sharing throughout different forms of outreach, there's the frost protection webinar that was hosted by Cornell that's available in the show notes, and there are also a number of frost protection resources that are on the Cornell Fruit resources page, which are also linked in the show notes. In addition, Dan Olmsted created a regional weather events page for NEWA weather stations, which includes a map of freeze events from both this year and from last year in 2023, when we had a freeze event on May 18th. And these maps show temperatures from NEWA weather stations on the mornings of April 25th and 26th. They may be helpful for you with crop insurance claims and things related. There's a link to that resource in the show notes too. Moving into the month of May, a really busy month for apples. Currently across the state, we're still seeing phenology and degree day accumulations to be slightly or a lot above average for the state. So that tends to be regionally specific this year. In general, Eastern New York seems to be close to averages, while Western New York continues to be a couple of weeks ahead of averages. Cooler temperatures most of last week kept things moving slowly and steadily with a little bit of insect activity, and then moving into a warmer day on Friday with temperatures in the 70s in most of the state sped things up a little bit. A cool front moved in over the weekend, and we had a pretty wet day on Sunday with 0.5 to 1.5 inches of rain reported at most weather stations. That's being followed by a little bit warmer conditions early this week, and then a return to cooler weather is expected at the end of the week. There have been a lot of swings in weather forecast information, and this has caused a lot of changes in disease model outputs, which has also caused a lot of understandable anxiety for everybody I've been speaking with. So keep a close eye on the weather and on those models, and keep paying attention to the disease management recommendations that Kerik has been giving. In many parts of the state, we've moved into bloom, and we're seeing a pretty big bloom across the state with great pollination weather. So there is a potential for a pretty large fruit set and potential crop. Pay attention to your regional outlets for scheduled petal fall meetings. The Hudson Valley Petal Fall meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, May 15th, and you can be paying attention to other regional outlets for petal fall meetings scheduled in other parts of the state. Phenology across the state now includes in the Hudson Valley, apples are in various stages of bloom to petal fall, pears are in petal fall or just past, peaches, cherries, and plums are at shuck split, and degree day accumulation continues to be a little bit above average compared to the 15 and 30-year averages. We're continuing to catch OFM in big increase in numbers this week, and we have our first codling moth capture this week. So just a reminder to be getting your codling moth traps out if you haven't already. In Western New York, in the Lake Ontario region, that area continues to be well ahead of averages, about 2 weeks ahead, and many varieties have moved into bloom. OFM biofix was made at the middle of last week, and in Geneva, there are large numbers of OFM. Also in Geneva, this is the second week of codling moth captures this season, with really large numbers this week. So again, a reminder to make sure you get those traps out if you haven't already. In the capital region, things are at about full pink to king bloom, depending on the varieties, and that area is near average degree day accumulation. In the Champlain Valley, early varieties like Cestar are just beginning to have a few open king blossoms, and that area is also slightly ahead of degree day averages. And next, a few upcoming pest events to be paying attention to. Early season insects have been fairly quiet over the past week with the cool temperatures, but as we get warmer, we expect things to pick up again. Tarnished plant bug is active now. We saw it a little bit earlier in the season when it was warm, and we expect to be seeing those insects active. You can be monitoring with white sticky cards or inspecting clusters for activity of those insects. We're continuing to see aphid activity, both green aphids and rosy apple aphids, which are typically active on terminal kennels and in clusters around this time during the season, remembering that the threshold for rosies is only one infested cluster to warrant treatment. So be paying close attention to that. Woolly apple aphid, we continue to get reports of woolies throughout the state, so continue to be inspecting for those. We're still getting reports of scale, both San Jose scale and other types of scale throughout the Northeast region, in addition to just New York this year. So pay attention to those. The first flight for San Jose scale will be happening pretty soon. So if you're monitoring for those insects, you can make sure to be having your traps out now. With regard to the Lepidopteran complex, as I said, OFM biofix has been made in most places in the state, and flight is peaking pretty rapidly. We have early codling moth captures in several places in the state, including the Hudson Valley and Geneva, so make sure to be putting your traps out early. Oblique-banded leaf roller, overwintering larvae, and some other Lepidopteran pests we've identified in clusters doing some early feeding, so make sure to be inspecting and looking for damage there. In addition, we've been seeing really large spongy moth activity in the Hudson Valley and some other places, so be looking out for those insects. And dogwood borer flight will begin after bloom, so you can be putting your traps out for those insects as well. Thinking about diseases, a few things you can be scouting for include looking for those scab lesions, the first infections that might have slipped through in any places that were unmanaged. So you can be looking for olive, fuzzy, greenish lesions on leaf surfaces that would indicate that any coverage was missed. As we're moving into warmer, dry days, you can be scouting for fire blight ooze, and also obviously being protected for fire blight infections where blossoms are open, paying attention to those recommendations that Kerik made. And finally, be looking out for powdery mildew. We're still seeing some of that, especially in drier places with whitish, twisted bud tissue that's opening up. You can be looking for that at this time. And as we're moving into this critical management period, we have a few updates to NEWA apple models and other resources that we wanted to make you aware of. All of these are linked in the show notes. The first update is to the NEWA fire blight model, and so to help you guide streptomycin applications, the fire blight model has been updated to visualize the effects of streptomycin applications up to 5 days in the future. So you can put in your streptomycin application date or your anticipated application date and look at the output for disease risk from the model to pick the optimal time for making that streptomycin application. The next update is a NEWA help desk frequently asked questions and table of contents. And so the landing page for the New York State IPM help desk for NEWA includes a ton of resources and tutorials, 3 to 10 minute videos that are organized by crop. And this web page has been reorganized to have a table of contents where you can easily access all of those tutorials. So I encourage you to visit that page if you're interested in refreshing yourself or relearning models. We also created a quick guide for apple insect pests. And so in addition to those video tutorials, we've created a written quick guide with the purpose of providing a quick overview for using NEWA models pertaining to important insect pests of apples. And so on this page, you'll find a brief introduction, definitions of some key terms that are used in understanding models, and brief model explanations. This includes plum curculio, codling moth, oriental fruit moth, and oblique-banded leaf roller. And lastly, I wanted to share a new resource that I mentioned last week that we're starting this year. This is the statewide orchard monitoring network for insect pests. It's a collection of information from industry members who are trapping for key insect pests throughout the state, and data is being contributed to a virtual resource that produces a dynamic map that you can filter to a region, a specific location, a time frame, or a species. It produces a map and a table, as well as a graph output for you to use to track trends across the state or for a specific location. If you're interested in seeing that information or contributing data to the network, please reach out to me. We'd love to have more collaborators. And we'll also include the link to that resource in the show notes. And now here are the current degree day accumulations for major fruit producing regions across the state. Throughout the season, we're continuing to align this information with some of the previous work that was done by Art and Yellow relating to Macintosh phenology and degree days. All of this information is in base 43 Fahrenheit. As a point of reference, pink for Macintosh is around 289, full bloom is 378, and petal fall is about 479. In Geneva, we're at about full bloom with 456. In Highland at the Hudson Valley Lab, we're in full bloom with 515. Clifton Park, we're in pink with 395. Peru at tight cluster or a little beyond with 307. Medina, an inland site in western New York, is at bloom with 463. Appleton North, a lake site, is at bloom with 377. Fairville, the apple shed, is an inland site in western New York, which is in bloom with 416, and Williamson Deamery is a lake site in Western New York, which is at Bloom with 412. As usual, we have some other upcoming pest events linked in the show notes and listed with their degree day accumulation averages. That's all for this week, and good luck until next time.